So, what if everything you thought you knew about ADHD was, well, wrong? That's the big, provocative question right at the heart of Gabor Mate's book, Scattered Minds. In this explainer, we're going to dive into his argument that ADHD isn't some fixed disease, but actually a story about our lives, a story that we can understand and maybe even start to heal.
I mean, that just perfectly captures it, doesn't it? The frantic internal world of ADHD. It's this constant, absolutely exhausting juggling act. But this feeling, it isn't just a metaphor. It's the result of something really specific happening inside the brain. So what's actually going on in there?
And this is where we hit a paradox that for a long time really stumped doctors. It seems completely backward, right? If your brain is already going a million miles an hour, why on earth would you give it a stimulant? Well, the answer means we have to look way beyond that hyperactive label and understand what's really happening on a neurological level.
Okay, so let's unpack this paradox. The key, Mate argues, isn't that the ADHD brain has too much activity going on, it's that it lacks the ability to control all that activity.
Mate points us to a specific part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex. You can think of it as the CEO of your mind. It's in charge of focus, impulse control, organizing things, all the big stuff. And here's the crucial insight. In the ADHD brain, this super important region is actually underactive. This sleeping traffic cop analogy just nails it. It resolves the whole paradox. The hyperactivity we see on the outside isn't a surplus of energy. It's the total chaos of uncontrolled signals inside. So a stimulant medication doesn't add more chaos. No, it acts like a strong cup of coffee for that sleepy traffic cop, waking up the prefrontal cortex so it can finally get in there, direct traffic, and bring some order to the chaos. Okay, so if that's what's happening, the next big question has to be why? What causes the prefrontal cortex to develop this way in the first place? For a long, long time, the simple answer was just genetics. But Mate argues that's only a tiny piece of a much, much bigger story. And this slide really shows the radical shift that Mate is proposing. He's asking us to move from the traditional medical model, the one that sees ADHD as a fixed, genetic disease, to a developmental one. And in this view, it's not about having a broken brain. It's an impairment in how the brain's circuits got wired. And here's the really hopeful part. He argues this impairment is potentially reversible. And this is absolutely crucial. Genes are not destiny. They're more like a blueprint, but it's the environment that's the contractor who decides what actually gets built. Mate gives this powerful example of the Cree people. Their diabetes rates just skyrocketed, not because their genes suddenly changed, but because their environment, their diet and lifestyle did. And he says the exact same principle applies to how our brain's attention circuits get wired. So, if the environment is the contractor building our brains, what's the most important material it uses? What is the single most crucial ingredient for developing things like focus and self-regulation? Well, it all starts with something called attachment. This is that deep biological drive that every single infant has to connect with a caregiver. It's a fundamental survival instinct, totally hardwired into us from birth. But, attachment alone isn't quite enough. This is where the real magic happens. It's called attunement. This is when a caregiver is so in sync with a child's emotional state that their brains are literally mirroring each other. It's like this back and forth emotional dance, and it's what physically builds the neural pathways for self-regulation in the infant's brain. A child basically learns to manage their own emotions by first having them managed with a caring adult. Check this out. There's this fascinating experiment that shows just how vital this attunement thing is. A baby is happy, totally engaged, interacting with their mom live on a screen. But then they're shown a recording of that same happy mom from just 1 minute earlier, and the baby becomes deeply distressed. So why? Because the connection isn't live. It's not responding to them in that exact moment. It proves that the developing brain just craves that real-time, attuned connection. This brings up a really big and, honestly, kind of tough question. If this deep, attuned connection is so essential for a healthy brain to develop, what happens when our whole society starts to make that connection harder and harder to achieve? Mate's argument is that modern society itself puts this enormous stress on parents. I mean, when caregivers are dealing with financial anxiety, isolation, just the frantic pace of life, it becomes incredibly difficult to provide that consistent, calm, attuned presence that a child's developing brain desperately needs to thrive. And the consequences? Well, they're pretty stark. Take a look at this number. a 5-fold increase in Ritalin consumption in Canada in just 7 years. And that's a trend we've seen all across North America. Our genes didn't suddenly change in less than a decade, our social environment did. It is so crucial to understand this. This is not about blaming parents. Mate's whole point is that parents are often doing the absolute best they can, but they're doing it in a social context that actively works against that essential parent-child bond. The issue isn't individual failure, it's societal pressure. So, given all this, where do we go from here? If ADHD is a developmental issue, not a disease, then the whole approach to treatment has to change too. The path to healing, then, it shifts from just managing symptoms to actually addressing the root cause. For children, the work is pretty clear: strengthen that parent-child bond. For adults, it's more of a journey of self-parenting, of understanding our own childhood wiring and learning to give ourselves the compassion and attunement we might have missed. The goal isn't to become someone new, but to finally heal the wounds that keep all those plates spinning.
And that leaves us with this really profound shift in perspective. When we start to view ADHD not as a disease that needs to be cured, but as a life story that needs to be understood, everything changes. A diagnosis is no longer just a label. It becomes an invitation to begin the work of healing.